In 1896, the United States Supreme Court upheld racial segregation laws for public facilities under the doctrine of separate but equal, meaning that these facilities may be separated by race, but the accommodations must be the same. Schools, drinking fountains, buses, and other facilities were often segregated in this manner, with signs placed where each race should be located. This was a 7-1 decision by the Supreme Court. In 1954, Plessy v. Ferguson was overturned in another landmark Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education. This time, the court declared separate but equal to be unconstitutional, and thus schools specifically were no longer to be segregated. The court stated that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. The Montgomery bus boycotts were a social and political protest campaign against the racial segregation policy on the public transit system of Montgomery, Alabama. The boycott lasted from December 5, 1995 until December 20, 1956, when a federal ruling took effect. These sit-in campaigns were part of the nonviolent means of protest. They began on February 1, 1960, when 4 African-American college students walked up to a whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and asked for coffee. When service was refused, the students sat quietly and waited to be served. Thus, the sit-ins began. The Freedom Riders were a group of activists who rode interstate buses into the segregated South of the United States. Beginning in 1961, this group was made up of mixed racial groups who sat where they so pleased. Many times, these groups were attacked violently and buses were set on fire. In order to bring awareness to the civil rights movement and protest the segregation laws in place, many activists were involved in both violent and nonviolent protests. These nonviolent protests included sit-ins, bus boycotts, and the Freedom Rides. Many of these displays were shut down by law enforcement using violent measures such as fire hoses and police dogs.
Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.